The greatest military mind in all of history, the undefeated emperor, the lord of Greece, Persia, Asia and Egypt. Without a doubt, Alexander the Great was one of the most influential figures of antiquity. While many Roman emperors idolized him, he made a much bigger impact on history other than just military conquest. His campaigns connected Greek, Eastern and African civilizations, sprouted new religions, philosophies and kingdoms. So, how has Alexander the Great changed history forever? Alexander the Great earned his name for a reason. His achievements really were great and something the world had never seen before. Despite creating a massive empire, he really took the vehicle his father had been making and drove it above and beyond. After the Peloponnesian War, in the 4th century BC, Athens and Sparta began losing significance, and it was Thebes that now became the main ruling state. The kingdom of Macedon was located north and was considered by most as the barbarian backwater of Greece, yet in just a few short years, Philip II managed to conquer and to bring most of Greece under his rule. From then on, he set his sights on the mighty Persian Empire, really the biggest force in the region, and the entire world for that matter, and the mortal, legendary enemy of Greek city-states. Just 100 or so years prior, the Greeks managed to barely make a stand and to defend their lands against them in mythical battles. Unexpectedly, Philip was assassinated, and Alexander, through a lot of political strife and bloodshed, inherited the kingdom along with a very experienced and a battle-proven army. Immediately, the entire Greek world rebelled and saw this as their chance for freedom, and chaos just erupted everywhere. Surprisingly to most, Alexander dealt with it hastily and ultimately completely razed the city of Thebes to the ground and enslaved its population. Thebes, at the time, was one of the most dominant city-states, and this action alone brought stability to Greece, as it literally scared everyone from attempting a rebellion again. With that dealt with, Alexander began his ultimate conquest of Persia. If you observe the map, at the time, Greece was tiny and the Persian Empire was massive, spanning all the way from Egypt to India. Not only was it gigantic in size, but it was much more populous and its armies were much larger. Well, the king of Macedon shattered the empire in 3 major battles, getting Darius III to retreat for years until he was ultimately betrayed and killed, and Alexander became the new ruler of Persia. In almost all encounters, he was hopelessly outnumbered, yet managed to string a decisive victory after victory, actually never losing a single battle in his entire life. For this reason, Alexander is considered one of the greatest military minds of the time, even up to this day. He rarely made any mistakes, and due to military tactics such as the phalanx, intelligent use of cavalry, and excellent leadership, the Persian army was crushed. He was so ingenious that during the siege of Tyre, which is an island off the coast of today's Lebanon, he managed to accomplish just an impossible siege. As he couldn't reach it in any way, he blockaded it for months, building a causeway connecting the island to the land and ultimately destroying it and just enslaving all the people. After about 12 years, Alexander built one of the largest empires in all of human history, which was naturally short-lived, but his influence on history, philosophy, and even our thought today is of significance without measure. While many romanticize Alexander and his conquests, they definitely weren't pretty, and he was known for brutality, murdering and just enslaving people. However, this wasn't to fulfill some sadistic psychological desire, but usually a tactic to prevent any rebellions, which was highly effective during his reign. Alexander, in just a bit more than a decade, went from tiny Greece, a region with quite a similar culture, to now ruling over many different nationalities, religions, all the way to India and Egypt. This was a major problem, obviously, as he couldn't possibly rule all this land from faraway Greece. So, during his conquest, Alexander created new cities and attempted to use a Greek form of government while also granting autonomy to the locals. Of course, this alone was not enough. Seeing that the Persians were tolerant, as long as their religious customs were respected, and the people of Egypt saw him as a liberator and a new pharaoh, he figured out the most effective way to consolidate power. Instead of just imposing his rule with sheer force and converting all the citizens to Greek culture, Alexander decided to present himself as a successor to Darius III and the new god ruler of Persia. Despite originally being a Hellenistic hegemon, he quickly took a liking to the Eastern customs. This was for roughly 3 reasons. First is that many Greeks saw the Persians, one of them being his teacher Aristotle, as barbarians and looked at them with a sense of superiority, and as Alexander was Macedonian, he felt that on his own skin and he didn't really share this belief, plus he was in awe with the Persian Empire. Second is his own psychology, as he most likely hated his father and saw himself as the son of Zeus instead and a demigod. Now, as opposed to the more democratic Greeks, the Egyptians and the Persians worshipped their own rulers as deities, and this greatly flattered him. However, it wasn't just simple flattery, as the third reason is just the sheer numbers. This seemed like the most efficient way to maintain the empire, to prevent rebellions, and to have a new, very dedicated and loyal citizenry that would be ready to die for him at any moment. This attitude of tolerance naturally created a synergy of new Eastern cultures with the Greek one and really changed the world forever. Initially, the Eastern world was Hellenized, the Greek language became the language of literature, and it would really stay that way all the way until the spread of Islam. The great city of Babylon had become largely Hellenized, and most of Persia began accepting Greek philosophy and science. At the same time, even more importantly, as the empire was now gigantic, Greek civilization became less and less Greek. With Alexander as an example of accepting new traditions, people of Greece began getting influenced by Eastern customs more than ever before in history. Babylonian science became available to Greek curiosity, as well as Zoroastrian dualism, and to a lesser extent Buddhism and various other Indian religions. While this synergy of culture wasn't a bad thing, if you look at the history of Western thought, these new customs greatly set back Greek civilization. See, before the Alexander's conquests, Greece was really something unique in the world. While obviously, as any other culture at the time, they had their own share of various superstitions, they really were focused on ultimately finding the truth, getting to the bottom of metaphysics, and figuring out the universe without having religion getting in the way in any major fashion. In the centuries prior, they started thinking about atoms, developed democracy, created theories on the cosmos, which were later used to develop what we know today, and in a way, they paved the way for modern science to develop. Well, this mix of Eastern customs destroyed this spirit significantly. While the Greeks incorporated a bit of Eastern science, they really were much more interested in astrology, magic, and various other superstitions that weren't really based in sound logic. According to Gilbert Murray, an expert in ancient Greece, astrology fell upon the Hellenistic mind as a new disease falls upon some remote island people. Everyone was ready to receive the germ. From that point forward, we never really saw any significant progress in science, philosophy, and revolutionary thinking until the past 500 years. Of course, I'm not saying this was because of influence of Persia, but also due to instability that ensued. When Alexander died, his generals took over the various parts of the empire. However, instead of realizing his ultimate goal of forming a massive united kingdom, they decided to create their own realms to consolidate power and to just go to wars with each other. From this point forward, chaos was the normal state of the world. Constant wars, various factions battling for power, and this only really solved itself when the Romans, a few centuries later, conquered all of these regions and ultimately brought stability. While the Roman Empire is arguably the greatest empire that ever existed in terms of stability and power, it was much different from the Greeks. Romans considered themselves initially as barbarians to Greeks. Roman leaders such as Caesar and many other very notable emperors saw Alexander as their idol and the unachievable goal that they're striving for. They greatly incorporated Greek philosophy and mythology, but they never really brought significant contributions of their own. We can look at it this way in very simple terms. Greek civilization was a city-based civilization that proved itself incapable of securing large areas, maintaining peace, and developing a bureaucracy to sustain a massive empire. Romans, while not really as intellectual, were an excellent military power in terms of discipline and administration. As Rome incorporated much of Greek culture, they also incorporated the elements from the East that the Greeks had previously acquired, and this spread across all of Europe later on. However, before Romans brought the stability, Alexander's conquests really paved the way for the rise of Christianity. The chaos that ensued after his death greatly shifted the public view of life. Anarchy was the normal state at the time. You could be doing everything right and just getting your village burned, pillaged, or getting yourself killed. There were constantly these mercenary armies, these wars, and non-stop chaos. This was very different from what the Greeks were used to. Previously, many of them believed in democracy, feeling like they're in power, as in they can change the current state of affairs as a citizen. However, the chaos shifted this belief, and people felt more and more hopeless, feeling that this life on Earth is just unfair and that there is something better waiting for them in the afterlife. Together with the elements of Eastern religions, Christianity was formed. Ultimately, it took over the Roman Empire and changed the world forever. Philosophy from that point forward became less about metaphysics and getting to the truth of the universe, questioning everything, and more about rescuing people spiritually. Of course, all of this was caused indirectly by Alexander the Great, but it is safe to say that without him, the entire world would be a different place today, and that he was one of the most influential figures in all of human history. Thank you for watching. Check out how the plague nearly wiped out Europe, and also check out our Instagram page where we post daily facts. See you next time.